and welcome to another episode of the University Duel Podcast, where we talk about university life and more. And with me today, I have Michael, but I'm going to allow him introduce himself to us and tell us a bit about what he does. Hi, Mr. Michael.
Hi, thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's nice being here today. My name is Michael Ajayi,
Okay.
and I have the privilege of being the country director for Enactors Nigeria.
Okay.
Enactors Nigeria is part of a global non-profit organization that focuses in developing young people, particularly in leadership, entrepreneurship, and project management skills. And we're active in 33 countries around the world and 35 tertiary institutions in Nigeria.
That's very interesting. Just fun fact aside, my mom works a lot in development work, and I think it's a very great work. And I think one thing that it doesn't necessarily break my heart, but I'm hoping to see is more Nigerian-founded institutions as thus doing stuff here in Africa and even outside the world, because a lot of these organizations have intentionally put money aside and built relationships so that they can do more than just profit, but actually build societies. And I think it's very important work that you do.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are quite a number of local non-profits that are grants given, all right? So typically you would seek grants from international donor organizations. Today we have a few Nigerian donor organizations who actually give grants to Nigerian and other African countries, for them to be able to do the work that they do in development space. So it's quite a shift and a movement, and that is very commendable.
Yes, absolutely, it is. But today we're going to talk about school and sex and how, if you think comprehensive sex education should be taught in schools. And just for context, so Nigeria likes to profile themselves as a conservative society, but we're not. We just gloss over the fact of the things that happen. And it was very interesting because when I was in university, I needed to write a report, just write an article, and I decided to write about comprehensive sex education. And when I was doing my research, it was very interesting to find out that, so for example, a thing that we prioritize a lot in this part of the world is chastity and virginity and whatnot. But I found out that based on that research, countries that implemented comprehensive sex education into their education system, they had higher percentage of people not sexually active, because they were more aware of what sex was, what the consequences of it could be, and what the dangers were, and they were like, you know what, I think I'm going to take this decision, as opposed to people who shield conversations around it because they think they are protecting people from it. So I'd like to know what your thoughts are.
I think you already nailed it. We actually used to be a very conservative nation, right? Until date, there are parts of the country that are very conservative. However, with the advent of technology, social media
is the problem.
And the world is fast becoming a global village,
yes,
right? With technology and social media and all of that. So people are very exposed. Today we have a lot of more Nigerians traveling to study abroad than we used to have.
Yeah.
And so that innocence, that conservative nature that we grew up knowing,
the culture
there's a cultural shift, there's a paradigm shift, and therefore we have much more younger people becoming more sexually active than they used to be. There was a time when if a young lady, even at 22, were to get pregnant, should feel like she had killed someone, should feel like, how would she even face her parents?
Yes.
But today you see 17, 18-year-old pregnant. Yeah? And the thing is, because of lack of education.
Yes.
Now, a lot of people, we forget that times have changed, culture is changing, there's more exposure. Therefore, the things we try to protect our children from,
they're seeing it
at the touch of a button on their phones,
absolutely,
or their laptops. So we need to change, and the only way we can protect them now is not by shielding them from it, but by exposing them to it through education, to let them know what it is, to let them know how what the consequences can be, how to protect themselves, but more importantly, stop them from doing it as much as you can. But because you will not be with them everywhere, then let them know what the consequences are, and so that they can make their decisions themselves.
Yes.
That's
Absolutely. I'm very inclined to agree, especially because a lot of people are against sex education because they feel like they are exposing people to it, and that will make them indulge in it more, in sex more, which research has proven otherwise. And you said something about exposure, and the issue with exposure and learning off the internet, as it were, is that the truth isn't always whole.
Yeah, it's not regulated.
It is not whole, and it is not healthy at all. But if we can curate curriculums in a way that is objective, I think that we can begin to redefine our society.
Absolutely.
And I like that you work in development work, because I'm sure that one of the things that you're aware of is that things like sexual abuse are literally an epidemic that is ravaging our society. And statistics show that almost 60% of people that are sexually abused experience child abuse. And so I think the question I want to then ask is, how early on do you think we should start teaching children about sex, especially because the younger you are, the more susceptible you are to not knowing what is being done to you. And so if you are aware, you can... Example, I had a friend, she told me that her mom kept insisting that she wanted to talk about sex to the children actually in church, and that every single member of the children's department was like, no, and she went against them, and then she did. And she said literally the next day, a young girl went into the bathroom and a man followed her, and from what she had heard, because normally she could maybe not have seen that as a bad thing, she started to scream and call for help, and that's how she was, how she escaped that situation. So how early do you think we can start teaching children about this, and how can we tailor it in a way that protects them as opposed to exposing them?
The truth is, if you don't tell them, they will find out anyways. And it's better to tell them in a measured manner, and in a deliberate manner, than them finding out elsewhere.
All at once.
All at once, or on the internet, or hearing it from someone else. And when we talk about sex education, it's not necessarily about having intercourse, right?
Yes, so much,
that's just a part of it. There are other parts of it, particularly for children, as you have mentioned. We could start by letting them know the parts of their bodies. We can start by letting the young lady know why she's different from the young man, right? And we can let her know, or let him know, as little as 4 or 5, what body parts are private parts that no one else
should have access
except
to.
Mommy can have access to. No one else, even daddies, sometimes you keep them aside, except Mommy. No disrespect to daddies, but I mean, you can flip it both ways, really.
Absolutely.
But I think my point is, we must educate them to understand what parts of their body are private to them, that no one except maybe Mommy and Daddy can have access to. So when anyone makes the attempt to touch them, they know
that this is a red flag.
And other things that can happen is teach them what red flags to look out for. When somebody tells a child, don't tell anybody, this is our little secrets, that should be a red flag. Because the child should not be afraid of telling the parent anything. So if anyone says, don't tell your parents, that is the first thing that child should tell the parents. Sometimes you hear things like, if you tell them, I will kill you, and they scare them away. But if we educate them at that tender age, that listen, I am your best friend as a parent, you can trust me with anything. I will never judge you. And you win their trust, and you actually live it. You don't just say the words, but you actually do not condemn them, do not judge them. You build that trust, so that when they go out there and someone touches her in that private area, and tells
can't get
her,
help from
don't
you.
tell anyone, she comes back home and she
And
says,
tells,
Mommy,
this is what
uncle
happened.
such and such did that. I know, because the dangers are everywhere, and the most I think studies have also shown that the perpetrators are always around
you.
They are not necessarily strangers. Mostly they are people within the family, within the home, and so it's important for them to know that no one should have access to those things, and they should look out for certain red flags, and they must trust their parents. But there lies the problem. Are the parents equipped to win their trusts? And how do you do that? You never judge them. Even if you want to scream, even if you want to just fly off the handle, you have to restrain yourself, just so the child doesn't get intimidated, doesn't get scared, so that he or she can give you the full story.
Yes.
So because you need that information
Absolutely.
to be able to take action. Yeah.
Something you said that really stood out to me, which is like the last thing I want us to cover, is you mentioned that sex education is not just about intercourse, and that's very brilliant, because as a woman is when I started experiencing puberty, and in fact even after puberty, that I started to realize that I didn't know enough about my body and my reproductive system. And so, for example, in this time of the world, there's a rising number in things like PCOS and just a bunch of things. And so I think I want you to kind of frame, what does sex education truly encompass?
I think it's everything from, even for the young ladies and even for the young boys, right? Taking the young ladies, the example you cited, this young lady at some point in her life, maybe between the age of 9 and 12, depending on hormones, she will get into puberty. She will start menstruating at some point, maybe at her early teens, she will start menstruating. She shouldn't find out about menstruation on her first day of menstruation. She should have been prepared for that, She should have been engaged. She should have been told. She should be looking forward to it with excitement. Not that on the day she gets scared, what's happening to me? Yes. And, so someone should have taken her through that journey. And the best person to do that for the young girl is her mom, right? But then daddies can do that as well. So it starts from there, and then it goes all the way to even teaching them what is not acceptable, what they cannot do to other people, their peers, right? For instance, you have a young boy who feels entitled. No, he needs to know that if the lady, and this thing starts very little, if the young girl is holding for instance, a young girl is holding something, he can't take it by force. Even if it belongs to him, he needs to tell the mom that my sister is holding my stuff, I need it back. He should not be allowed to take it by force, even if it belongs to him. Because when he begins to take things by force, he begins to get entitled, right? That this thing is mine. And at a later stage, it becomes difficult for him to differentiate between the body parts that he should not touch, because he now feels she's a woman, she's mine, I can have her, right? And then he forces himself. So it's a whole gamut of things that need to be discussed. It's not just about intercourse. Intercourse is a very significant part of it, no doubt. But then all those other soft things around it are very important. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm very excited about having this conversation. And I hope that people begin to have more open minds about because at the end of the day, information protects you.
Yeah.
Information protects you, and I think we need that information in our schools and in our homes.
Yeah. I agree. And final note, we're talking sex and all of that. As much as possible, if we train up our kids and encourage them to maintain their what's the word now? Their bodies. Avoid sex. Sex is not for young people to mess around with. There are significant consequences, that impacts people. So our first point of call will be to discourage them from having sex, and keep it until marriage. That is what sex was designed for. It's designed actually for marriage. But we know the world we live in today, which is why, since we will not be with them at all times, educate them well enough so that they are protected, and we pray over them.
Yeah, we pray and fast.
We pray and fast over them. And it works.
It does.
Yeah, some people think it doesn't, but it does work. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us.
Thank you very much. Nice.
Yeah, and that is all on this episode of the University of Duel Podcast. See you next time. Bye.